I never thought I'd be sitting here, sharing the most devastating discovery of my life with strangers on the internet. But if you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to Voices of Rosa and tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from. I need to know this story is reaching people who might be going through something similar, because what I'm about to tell you will shake you to your core. My name is Rosa Martinez, and 3 months ago, I discovered that my 17-year-old son, Carlos, my pride and joy, my whole world, was sneaking into my bedroom every night and stealing money from my purse. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part is why he was doing it, and who was pulling the strings behind this nightmare that nearly destroyed our family. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand who we were before this all went to hell. Carlos and I have been a team for 12 years now, ever since his father Miguel walked out on us when Carlos was just 5 years old. I work as a school counselor at Jefferson High, the same school Carlos attends, and I've watched him grow from a shy little boy with thick glasses and a stutter into this confident, brilliant young man who codes websites for pocket money and volunteers at the animal shelter every weekend. We live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Riverside, California, where the rent eats up most of my salary, but we've made it work. Carlos has never been the kind of kid to ask for much. While his classmates begged their parents for the latest gaming consoles and designer sneakers, Carlos was content with secondhand clothes and a laptop he'd saved up by mowing lawns in our complex. "Mom, we're doing fine," he'd say whenever I apologized for not being able to afford something he wanted. "We've got each other, and that's enough." That's the kind of kid he is. God, I'm still struggling with past and present tense, because the Carlos I thought I knew feels like a stranger now, even though I know that the real Carlos is still in there somewhere. Our evening routine was sacred. I'd get home from work around 4:30, exhausted from mediating teenage drama and counseling kids through family crises. The irony isn't lost on me now, and Carlos would already be at the kitchen table, homework spread out like a battle plan. "How was your day, Mija?" I'd ask, using the Spanish endearment my mother had whispered to me as a child. He'd look up with those dark eyes he inherited from Miguel, the only good thing that man ever gave him, and launch into stories about his programming class or the new coding language he was teaching himself. Dinner was always simple: spaghetti with marinara sauce, grilled cheese, and tomato soup, or whatever I could throw together with ingredients from the discount grocery store. But Carlos never complained. He'd help me cook, bumping my hip with his as we maneuvered around our tiny kitchen, making jokes about our gourmet cuisine and planning the elaborate meals we'd make when we strike it rich. Money has always been tight, but we managed. My counselor's salary covers our basic needs: rent, utilities, groceries, Carlos's school supplies. For everything else, I've learned to be creative. I clip coupons religiously, shop clearance racks, and yes, I keep cash hidden away for emergencies. Tips from the occasional tutoring sessions I do on weekends, the $20 my sister slips me when she thinks I'm not looking, birthday money from my mother. It all goes into my purse in a small, zippered compartment, my rainy day fund for things like Carlos's yearbook photos or a new pair of shoes when his sneakers finally fall apart. I trusted that money was safe. I trusted that our home was safe. I trusted my son. The first time I noticed money missing, I convinced myself I was losing my mind. It was a Tuesday in early September, and I distinctly remembered having $60 in my wallet. 3 $20 bills I'd gotten from the bank specifically to pay for Carlos's class ring deposit. When I went to count it out Wednesday morning, there were only 2 20s. My hand shook as I searched through my purse, checking every pocket, every fold of fabric. Nothing. "Carlos," I called out as he grabbed his backpack. "Did you need to take money from my wallet for anything?" He paused in the doorway, eyebrows raised in that innocent way that made him look like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "No, Mom." "Why?" "I thought I had $60, but I can only find 40. I must have miscounted at the bank." Want me to ask Mrs. Chin if she needs help with her groceries again. She always tips well. Mrs. Chen was our elderly neighbor who had trouble carrying her shopping bags up 2 flights of stairs. Carlos had been helping her for months, never accepting payment until she insisted. That's sweet, baby, but I think we're okay. I probably just spent it and forgot. But I hadn't forgotten. I might be tired most days. I might occasionally mix up students' names or lose my keys. But I don't forget money. Not when every dollar matters as much as it does in our household. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe I had miscounted. Maybe I'd used it for gas and the transaction hadn't posted to my account yet. There were a dozen logical explanations that didn't involve anyone, stealing from me. 2 weeks later, it happened again. This time it was a $10 bill from the emergency stash in my purse. Money I'd been saving to buy Carlos a new graphing calculator for his advanced math class. I'd counted it the night before. $47 in small bills, mostly 1s and 5s for my tutoring sessions. Thursday morning, it was $37. The paranoia crept in like fog, slow and suffocating. I started checking my wallet obsessively, counting and recounting the bills until the numbers blurred together. I made lists of where I'd been, what I'd bought, trying to account for every penny. But the math never added up. "Rosa, you're looking stressed lately," my colleague Amanda mentioned during lunch in the faculty lounge. "Everything okay at home?" How could I explain that I was starting to suspect someone in my own building, my own life, of stealing from me? How could I voice the terrible thoughts creeping through my mind about Mrs. Chen, who had a key to water my plants when Carlos and I went to visit my sister? Or about David, the maintenance guy who'd been in my apartment twice that month to fix a leaky faucet? How could I admit that I was even beginning to wonder about Carlos, sweet Carlos who'd never taken so much as an extra cookie from the jar without asking? "Just the usual stuff," I told Amanda, forcing a smile. "Teenage drama at home, you know how it is." But it wasn't teenage drama. Teenage drama was Carlos forgetting to take out the trash or leaving his clothes on the bathroom floor. This was something else entirely, something that made my stomach twist with dread every time I opened my wallet. The thefts escalated. $25 from my coat pocket while it hung in my bedroom closet. $15 from the zippered compartment of my purse while I showered. Small amounts, but frequent enough that I started hiding money in increasingly ridiculous places. Taped under my dresser drawer, folded inside an old book, even frozen in an ice cube tray in the back of our freezer. But the money kept disappearing. I began to watch Carlos more carefully, hating myself for it, but unable to stop. He seemed perfectly normal, still helping with dinner, still showing me funny memes on his phone, still giving me those spontaneous hugs that reminded me why I'd fought so hard to give him a good life after Miguel left us. If anything, he seemed more attentive than usual, asking about my day, offering to run errands, insisting on doing the grocery shopping himself. "You work so hard, Mom," he said one evening, taking the shopping list from my hands. "Let me handle this. You relax." It should have warmed my heart. Instead, a cold suspicion settled in my chest like a stone. Was he offering to go shopping because he knew exactly how much money I had? Was he keeping track of my spending so he'd know how much he could take without me noticing? God, what kind of mother thinks these things about her own child? By October, I was barely sleeping. Every small sound in the apartment made me bolt upright, straining to hear footsteps in the hallway. I started keeping my purse in bed with me, clutched against my chest like a security blanket, but even that didn't help. The money still disappeared, smaller amounts now, as if the thief knew I was onto them and was being more careful. $73 vanished from my emergency fund in a single week. Money I needed for Carlos's college application fees. When I realized it was gone, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried until my chest ached. Not just because of the money, but because I was starting to believe that someone I trusted, someone I loved, was betraying me in the most fundamental way. The breaking point came on a Thursday night in late October. Carlos had gone to bed early, claiming he had a headache, and I was grading papers at the kitchen table when I remembered the $40 I'd tucked into my wallet that afternoon. Tutoring money from helping Jennifer Valdez with her college essay. I needed to count it for my budget spreadsheet, so I pulled out my wallet and opened it. Empty. Completely empty except for my debit card and driver's license. My hands trembled as I searched every compartment, every fold of leather. Nothing. $40 gone. Money I'd earned by staying 2 hours late at school. Money we needed for groceries this weekend. Money that had been in my possession for less than 6 hours. I sat there in the yellow glow of our kitchen light, staring at my empty wallet, and something fundamental shifted inside me. The doubt, the self-recrimination, the desperate search for innocent explanations, all of it evaporated, leaving behind a crystalline clarity that was somehow worse than the confusion. Someone in my life was stealing from me. Someone who had access to my home, my bedroom, my personal belongings. Someone who knew my routines well enough to know when it was safe to take money without being caught. I thought about Mrs. Chun, frail and sweet, always pressing homemade cookies into Carlos's hands. I thought about David, professional and courteous, who'd never so much as glanced at my purse when he was fixing our sink. I thought about Amanda and my other colleagues, none of whom had ever been in my apartment. And then I thought about Carlos, my 17-year-old son, who was currently sleeping in the room next to mine, who'd been acting so helpful lately, so eager to take care of errands and shopping. Carlos, who knew my schedule better than anyone, who could predict when I'd be in the shower or grading papers with my headphones on. Carlos, who had easy access to my bedroom every night while I slept. The thought made me physically ill, but I couldn't shake it. Not anymore. I stood up from the kitchen table, legs unsteady, and walked to Carlos's bedroom door. It was closed, no light seeping out from underneath. I pressed my ear against the wood and heard nothing. No movement, no whispered phone conversations, just the steady hum of his white noise machine. But as I stood there in the hallway, still clutching my empty wallet, I made a decision that would change everything between us. Tomorrow night, I would find out the truth. I would fake being asleep and see who came creeping into my room in the dark. I would catch the thief in the act, no matter who it turned out to be, even if it destroyed me to learn it was my own son. The next evening, Friday, I prepared for what I hoped would be the longest night of my life. I wanted to be wrong so desperately that my chest physically ached. I wanted to catch Mrs. Chun sneaking in with her spare key, or discover that David the maintenance guy had somehow made a copy. I wanted it to be anyone except the boy sleeping in the room next to mine. I went through my normal routine with robotic precision. Dinner with Carlos, leftover chicken and rice that tasted like cardboard in my mouth while he chatted about his computer science teacher's new assignment. Evening TV together on our worn couch, his head resting against my shoulder as we watched some mindless sitcom. "Love you, Mom," he said when he headed to bed at 10:30, pressing a kiss to my forehead like he had every night since he was small. "Love you too, me Joe," I whispered back, my voice catching slightly on the words. I waited an hour before I started my charade. I changed into my most comfortable pajamas, brushed my teeth, and deliberately counted out $50 in small bills, 2 20s and 2 5s, placing them prominently in my wallet's main compartment. Then I arranged my purse on the nightstand, unzipped and slightly open like I always did. The hardest part was the waiting. I lay in bed with my eyes closed, but every muscle in my body was tense, coiled like a spring. I practiced breathing deeply and evenly the way I'd learned in the stress management workshop at school. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. My bedroom was never completely dark. Streetlight filtered through the thin curtains, creating gray shadows that danced across the walls when cars passed by. At 1:23 a.m., I heard it, the soft creak of my bedroom door opening. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain whoever was entering could hear it. I forced myself to keep breathing steadily, to maintain the slight snore I'd been practicing. Through my barely cracked eyelids, I watched a tall, lean silhouette slip into my room. Carlos. Even in the dim light, I recognized everything about him. The way he moved with careful, deliberate steps, the familiar outline of his shoulders, the nervous habit he had of running his hand through his hair when he was anxious. He was doing it now, standing frozen in my doorway for what felt like an eternity, listening to my fake sleeping sounds. He padded closer to my bed, each footstep a knife through my heart. I could smell his shampoo, that coconut scent he'd been using since middle school, and the faint aroma of the peppermint chapstick he kept on his nightstand. These were the comforting scents of my son, the boy I'd rock to sleep when he had nightmares, the teenager who still sometimes sought me out for hugs when he was stressed about school. Now he was stealing from me. Through the thin slits of my eyelids, I watched him reach for my purse. His movements were practiced, confident this wasn't his first time. He knew exactly which pocket to check, his fingers finding my wallet with disturbing efficiency. I heard the soft whisper of bills being counted, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from crying out. He took one of the 20s, just one, leaving the rest untouched. Somehow, that restraint made it worse. It meant this was calculated, methodical. He was taking just enough to avoid immediate detection, just enough to make me doubt myself. After he replaced my wallet and crept back toward the door, I heard him pause. For a terrifying moment, I thought he'd realized I was awake. But then I felt the faintest touch on my forehead, his lips pressing a gentle goodnight kiss against my skin, just like when he was little and would sneak into my room after a bad dream. The tenderness of that gesture, while my $20 sat in his pocket, nearly broke me. I lay there after he left, silent tears streaming down my face, grieving for the trust that had just shattered beyond repair. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, mind racing through a kaleidoscope of questions. How long had this been going on? What did he need the money for? Was he being bullied? Using drugs? In trouble with someone dangerous? Every explanation felt equally devastating. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. Carlos wandered into the kitchen around 9, hair sticking up in every direction, yawning and reaching for the coffee I'd already prepared. "Morning, Mom. Sleep okay?" I studied his face, searching for guilt, for some sign of what he'd done just hours earlier. But he looked exactly like he always did in the morning, sleepy, rumpled, innocent. If I hadn't witnessed the theft myself, I would never have suspected him of anything worse than forgetting to put his dishes in the dishwasher. Fine, I managed. You. Like a rock. I was so tired after finishing that programming assignment. He poured coffee into his favorite mug, a chipped ceramic one I'd bought him at a science museum gift shop 3 years ago. Want me to make pancakes? I found a new recipe online that looks amazing. The normalcy of it was excruciating. How could he stand there offering to cook breakfast when he'd stolen from me hours earlier? How could he look me in the eye and act like nothing had happened? But I forced myself to play along. That sounds great, baby. I'll just grab a quick shower. I needed to document everything while the memory was fresh. In my bedroom, I wrote down the exact time, the amount taken, every detail I could remember. Then I checked my wallet, confirming what I already knew. 120 was missing. I photographed the remaining bills with my phone, creating a timestamp. If this was going to continue, I needed evidence. The next 3 nights followed the same devastating pattern. Sunday, $15 taken from a different pocket of my purse. Tuesday, Another 20, this time from the emergency cash I kept in my jewelry box. Thursday, $10 from my coat pocket, which hung in the closet right next to my bed. Each theft was surgical in its precision. Carlos never took enough to leave me completely broke, never emptied any single hiding spot entirely. He was managing my financial trauma the way a puppeteer controls a marionette, keeping me functional enough to keep earning money for him to steal. I documented everything with the methodical precision I used for my counseling notes at work. Times, amounts, locations, photographs of my purse before and after. I even downloaded an app that let me record video silently, capturing grainy footage of Carlos's midnight visits. Watching those videos later, seeing my son's face illuminated by the phone screen as he counted my money, was like drinking poison. But it wasn't just the thefts that disturbed me. Carlos's behavior during the day was shifting in subtle ways that made my skin crawl with unease. He'd always been a physically affectionate kid, but now his hugs lasted a beat too long. His "I love you, Mom" carried an undertone that sounded almost desperate. He volunteered for errands constantly, insisting on grocery shopping, picking up my dry cleaning, running to the pharmacy. "You work so hard," he'd say, taking my car keys before I could protest. "Let me handle this stuff." At first, I'd been touched by his helpfulness. Now I realized he was managing my schedule, controlling when I left the apartment and when I'd be home. He was mapping my routines like a burglar casing a house. The phone calls started the second week of my surveillance. I'd hear him talking in hushed tones after he thought I'd gone to sleep, speaking Spanish in rapid, anxious bursts. My Spanish was rusty, but I caught fragments. "No tengo más," I don't have more. "Necesito tiempo," need time. "Ella vi a saber," she's going to know. Who was he talking to? And why was he so afraid? On a Tuesday night, 10 days after my surveillance began, Carlos's phone conversation was longer and more agitated than usual. I crept to my bedroom door and pressed my ear against the wood, straining to understand. "No puedo hacer eso," he was saying. "Y es mi mama." "You can't do that. She's my mother." A long pause, then, Okay. "Mañana." "Midnight." "El parque." "Tomorrow." "Midnight." "The park." "El parque." Riverside Park was only 4 blocks from our apartment, a small recreation area with a playground and some picnic tables that emptied out after dark. What was Carlos planning to do there at midnight? I spent the next day in agony, watching Carlos move through his normal routine while knowing he was planning something for that night. He seemed more anxious than usual, checking his phone constantly, jumping when I spoke to him. "Everything okay, mijo?" I asked after he startled when I offered him seconds at dinner. "Yeah, just tired. Big test tomorrow." He gave me that smile I'd once found so reassuring, but now it looked strained around the edges. Wednesday night, I waited until I heard Carlos leave through the back door at 11:45 p.m. Then I threw on dark clothes and followed him. The October air was crisp and sharp, carrying the scent of dying leaves and distant wood smoke. Carlos walked quickly but carefully, staying in the shadows between streetlights, checking over his shoulder frequently. I hung back, using parked cars and trees for cover, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Riverside Park at night was a different creature than the cheerful playground I remembered from Carlos's childhood. The swings swayed slightly in the breeze, their chains creaking with a sound like old bones. The playground equipment cast strange shadows, and the picnic area was shrouded in darkness beyond the reach of the nearest street lamp. Carlos headed straight for the far corner of the park, where a cluster of old oak trees created a natural meeting spot. He sat on one of the picnic table benches, phone glowing in his hand, leg bouncing with nervous energy. At exactly midnight, a figure emerged from the tree line. Even from my hiding spot behind a maintenance shed, I could see this was an adult man, tall, stocky, wearing an expensive-looking leather jacket that caught what little light filtered through the trees. As he got closer to Carlos, stepping partially into the glow of a distant street lamp, my blood turned to ice water in my veins. I knew that silhouette, those broad shoulders, that confident swagger, the way he held his head slightly tilted to the right. I'd seen it 1,000 times across family dinner tables, at backyard barbecues, at Carlos's birthday parties when he was small. Victor Hernandez, Miguel's former business partner and best friend. The man who'd consoled me when Miguel left, telling me what a fool my ex-husband was for abandoning such a wonderful family. The man who'd promised to look out for Carlos and be there if you need anything. The man who'd slowly disappeared from our lives after I refused his increasingly inappropriate advances 2 years after my divorce. Victor, who knew exactly how tight money was for us. Victor, who'd been in our apartment countless times and knew our routines. Victor, who had Carlos's phone number and could have been manipulating my son for months without me ever knowing. I watched in horror as Carlos stood up and pulled a wad of cash from his pocket, my cash, stolen from my purse night after night, and handed it over to this man who was supposed to be our friend. Victor counted the money quickly, his movements efficient and practiced. Then he leaned down to speak directly into Carlos's ear, one hand gripping my son's shoulder in what looked like a friendly gesture, but felt anything but. Carlos's entire body was rigid with tension, his head bowed like he was receiving a lecture or a threat. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes, but those were the longest 5 minutes of my life. I watched the man I'd once trusted speaking to my son in urgent, animated whispers, saw Carlos nod repeatedly, saw him hand over even more cash that I hadn't realized he was carrying. When Victor finally walked away, dissolving back into the shadows as suddenly as he'd appeared, Carlos remained at the picnic table for several minutes. His shoulders shook, and I realized he was crying silent, desperate sobs that carried across the empty park like a knife through my chest. My son was afraid. More than afraid, he was terrified. I stayed hidden until Carlos composed himself and began the walk home. Then I followed at a distance, my mind reeling with implications. Victor Hernandez manipulating my 17-year-old son. Victor, who knew all our vulnerabilities, all our pressure points. Victor, who'd once told me he'd do anything to help Miguel's family. By the time I slipped back into our apartment, 10 minutes after Carlos had returned, I'd reached a terrible understanding. This wasn't just theft. This was exploitation, manipulation, possibly extortion. My son wasn't a criminal. He was a victim. But a victim of what exactly? What did Victor have over Carlos that was powerful enough to turn my honest, loving boy into a thief? What was he threatening? What lies had he told? As I lay in bed that night, listening to Carlos toss and turn in the room next to mine, I knew that the surveillance phase was over. I had enough evidence to know who was behind the thefts, but I still didn't understand why. Tomorrow, I would have to find the courage to confront my son and uncover the full scope of what Victor Hernandez had done to our family. Because whatever web of lies and manipulation he'd spun around Carlos, I was going to tear it apart, thread by thread, even if the truth destroyed us both. Thursday morning dawned cold and gray, matching the storm brewing inside my chest. I'd barely slept, my mind churning with images of Victor's predatory smile and Carlos's terrified posture in that dark park. Every instinct I developed during 12 years of counseling traumatized teenagers was screaming that my son was being systematically abused. But I needed to understand the full scope of what Victor had done before I could figure out how to save Carlos from it. I called in sick to work, something I never did, and waited until Carlos left for school before I began my investigation. The first thing I did was search his room, something that went against every principle of trust and respect I'd tried to build with him. But trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. His bedroom looked exactly like any 17-year-old's. Unmade bed, clothes scattered across the floor, desk cluttered with school supplies and computer parts. But when I looked closer, I started noticing things that made my blood run cold. His laptop, which used to live permanently on his desk, was nowhere to be seen. The small safe where he kept his birthday money and savings from his weekend jobs sat open and empty in his closet. Most disturbing of all, tucked under his mattress, I found a prepaid flip phone I'd never seen before. My hands shook as I powered it on. The call log showed dozens of conversations with a single number over the past 4 months. Calls that often lasted an hour or more, always late at night when I thought Carlos was sleeping. The text message history made my stomach clench with rage and heartbreak. The earliest messages, from late June, were friendly and paternal. "Hey nephew, this is your Uncle Victor. Got your number from your dad's old contacts. How are you doing? Miss you, kid. I've been thinking about your father a lot lately. There are some things about him you should know. Things your mom might not have told you. Your dad loved you so much, Carlos. He never wanted to leave you and your mom. There were circumstances." I sank onto Carlos's unmade bed, reading message after message as Victor slowly, methodically, began to poison my son's mind against me. The manipulation was masterful in its subtlety. Victor never outright accused me of anything in those early texts. Instead, he planted seeds of doubt with seemingly innocent observations. Your dad was always worried about money. He had some investments, some assets that he wanted to make sure you and your mom would inherit. I wonder if she ever mentioned them to you. Miguel told me he'd set aside money for your college fund. Has your mom talked to you about that? I know your mom works hard, but your dad wanted to make sure you'd never have to struggle financially. He had plans, Carlos, big plans for your future. By July, the messages became more pointed. I hate to say this, kid, but I'm starting to worry your mom might not know about all of your dad's assets. Or maybe she does know, but doesn't want to share them with you yet. Parents sometimes think they're protecting their kids by controlling money. Your dad specifically told me he wanted you to have access to your inheritance when you turn 17. You're old enough now to know the truth about your family's finances. I found some paperwork in your dad's old files. There's definitely money that should be yours, Carlos. Money your mom might not even know exists. The lies were so smoothly constructed, so carefully designed to exploit every insecurity Carlos had about our financial struggles and his absent father. Victor was feeding my son a fantasy where Miguel hadn't been an irresponsible alcoholic who'd abandoned his family. He'd been a secret provider, a loving father who'd left hidden treasure for his son to discover. By August, Victor's messages took on an urgency that made my skin crawl. I've been trying to figure out the best way to get your inheritance to you without causing problems with your mom. She might not understand at first. Adults sometimes get weird about money, even when it rightfully belongs to their kids. The thing is, Carlos, there are some legal fees involved in accessing your dad's accounts. Nothing major, just some bureaucratic stuff that needs to be handled before we can get you what's yours. I know this is a lot to ask, but I need about $200 to start the paperwork process. Think of it as an investment in your future. Once we get access to your dad's money, you'll have enough for college and to help your mom too. $200. I remembered that first major theft in September when I'd noticed $40 missing and convinced myself I was going crazy. Carlos hadn't been taking money randomly. He'd been working toward a specific goal, collecting payments for Victor's fabricated legal fees. The September messages revealed the full scope of Victor's psychological manipulation. I know it's hard to get that much money without your mom noticing, but think about it this way. This money technically belongs to your family anyway. Your dad would want you to use whatever resources you have to secure your inheritance. Your mom works so hard because she doesn't know about the money your dad left. Once we get access to his accounts, you can surprise her with enough money to retire early. She'll understand why you had to be secretive once she sees how much you've helped the family. The lawyer says we need another $150 by next week. I know you can do this, Carlos. Your dad always said you were smart and resourceful. He'd be so proud of how you're taking care of your mom. I was crying by the time I reached October's messages, watching in real time as Victor escalated his manipulation. The legal stuff is taking longer than expected. There are some complications with your dad's estate that we need to resolve before we can access the main accounts. I hate to tell you this, Carlos, but it looks like your mom might have known about some of your dad's money all along. The lawyer found records showing she was listed on some of his accounts. If she's been hiding this from you, we need to be extra careful about how we handle things. Your dad specifically told me he wanted you to have access to your inheritance by your 18th birthday. We're running out of time, and I'm starting to worry your mom might try to claim everything for herself if she finds out what we're doing. The final messages from this week were the most chilling. We need to meet in person. There are some things I can't tell you over the phone. Wednesday night, midnight, Riverside Park. Come alone and don't tell your mom. This is about protecting your father's legacy. I know this is scary, Carlos, but your dad trusted me to take care of you. If your mom finds out what we're doing before we can secure your inheritance, she might do something drastic. Adults get weird about money, especially when they think they might lose control of it. I threw the phone across the room, watching it bounce off Carlos's dresser and clatter to the floor. The calculated cruelty of what Victor had done was breathtaking. He'd taken a grieving teenager's natural longing for his absent father and weaponized it, creating an elaborate fantasy where Carlos could be the hero who saved our family's financial future. But I needed to understand Victor's endgame. What was he really after? Miguel had died in that car crash 3 years ago with nothing but debts and empty promises. There was no inheritance, no hidden money, no secret accounts. So why was Victor spinning this elaborate lie? I spent the next 2 hours digging through old financial records, trying to piece together the truth about Miguel's business relationship with Victor. What I found in the bottom of a filing cabinet made everything click into place with horrible clarity. Life insurance documents. Miguel had taken out a substantial policy 3 years before his death. $250,000 with Carlos listed as the primary beneficiary and me as the trustee until he turned 18. I was the one who'd filed the claim after Miguel died, and the money had been sitting in a trust fund for Carlos ever since, earning interest and waiting for his 18th birthday. Victor knew about the insurance money. He'd been Miguel's business partner, of course he knew. But what he was counting on was that Carlos didn't know, and that my son's desperation to connect with his father's memory would make him easy to manipulate. Victor wasn't trying to steal money that didn't exist. He was positioning himself to claim money that very much did exist. By convincing Carlos that I was hiding his inheritance, by making himself the trusted adult who was helping Carlos access his father's legacy, Victor was setting up a con that would let him claim a substantial portion of that insurance money when Carlos turned 18 in 4 months. The beauty of the scam was its simplicity. Carlos would turn 18, gain access to his trust fund, and immediately give Victor a large chunk of it as payment for all the legal work he'd done to recover the inheritance. By the time Carlos realized he'd been manipulated, Victor would be long gone with a substantial payday. But the money Carlos had been stealing from me wasn't just funding Victor's elaborate lie. It was also serving a darker, psychological purpose. Every time my son took cash from my purse, Victor was reinforcing the narrative that I was the enemy, that I was selfish and secretive, that Carlos was justified in working against me to secure his rightful inheritance. Victor was systematically destroying the trust between Carlos and me, isolating my son so completely that he felt he had no choice but to rely on his manipulator for guidance and support. It was psychological abuse of the most insidious kind, dressed up as family loyalty and father-son bonding. I thought about calling the police immediately, but I knew that wouldn't be enough. Carlos was so deeply embedded in Victor's web of lies that he might not even believe me if I told him the truth. Worse, he might warn Victor that I'd discovered their scheme, giving the man time to disappear or escalate his manipulation. I needed proof that Carlos could see and understand. I needed to catch Victor in his lies in a way that would shatter the fantasy he'd constructed and help my son see the truth about what was being done to him. That afternoon, I drove to the offices of Peterson and Associates, the legal firm that had helped me set up Carlos's trust fund after Miguel's death. Sarah Peterson, the lawyer who'd handled Miguel's estate, was a sharp woman in her 50s who'd guided me through the worst period of my life with patience and competence. "Rosa, what a surprise!" she said when her secretary ushered me into her office. "Is everything all right? Carlos isn't in trouble, is he?" "Someone's been telling my son that Miguel left him a secret inheritance," I said without preamble. "They're claiming there are hidden accounts and assets that I'm keeping from him." Sarah's expression darkened immediately. "Estate fraud. We see this sometimes when there's substantial money involved. Who's making these claims?" I told her about Victor, about the months of manipulation, about the cash Carlos had been stealing to pay for fabricated legal fees. Sarah listened with the grim expression of someone who'd seen this kind of predatory behavior before. "The good news is that Carlos's trust fund is completely secure," she said when I finished. "Nobody can access it except you as trustee, and only for Carlos's direct benefit. When he turns 18, the full amount transfers to him automatically. No lawyers needed, no fees required." "How much is in there now?" I asked. "With interest, approximately $267,000. More than enough to pay for college and give Carlos a substantial financial foundation for his adult life. My son had $250,000 waiting for him in 4 months, and Victor Hernandez was systematically destroying our family to get his hands on it. I need your help," I told Sarah. "I need documentation proving that this money exists, that Carlos doesn't need to pay anyone to access it, and that Victor Hernandez has no legitimate role in Miguel's estate." Sarah nodded grimly. "I'll prepare a complete summary of the trust fund status and Carlos's legal rights as beneficiary. If someone is defrauding him with fake legal fees, we'll want to report this to both local police and the State Bar Association." As I drove home that evening, armed with legal documents and a clear understanding of Victor's game, I felt a cold determination settling in my chest. Victor had spent months poisoning my son's mind, turning my loving boy into a thief, destroying the trust that had been the foundation of our relationship. Tonight, I would begin the process of saving Carlos from the web of lies that had trapped him. But first, I had to figure out how to break through months of psychological manipulation and help my son see the truth about the man he thought was trying to help him, the man who was actually trying to rob him blind. Friday evening, I waited until after dinner to begin the most important conversation of my life. Carlos was at the kitchen table, half-heartedly working on calculus homework, occasionally glancing at his phone with the nervous energy that had become his constant companion. I sat down across from him with a manila folder containing everything I had discovered, the bank statements, the legal documents from Sarah Peterson, printouts of his text messages with Victor, and the videos I'd taken of his midnight thefts. "Carlos, we need to talk." Something in my tone made him look up immediately, his pencil freezing mid-equation. The color drained from his face as he saw the folder, and I watched him transform from my confident teenager into a trapped, terrified child. "Mom, He started, but I held up my hand. Before you say anything, I need you to know that I love you more than my own life, and nothing you've done changes that. But I also need you to know that I know everything. I opened the folder and placed his hidden phone on the table between us. Carlos stared at it like it was a venomous snake, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. I know about Victor. I know about the money you've been taking from my purse. I know about your meetings in the park. My voice was steady, but my hands trembled as I pulled out the printed text messages. And I know about the lies he's been telling you about your father. Carlos exploded out of his chair so violently that it toppled backward, clattering against our kitchen floor. You went through my things. You spied on me. His voice cracked with a mixture of outrage and panic. Mom, you don't understand. Then help me understand. I remained seated, keeping my voice calm even as my heart shattered watching my son's anguish. Tell me why you've been stealing from me for months. Tell me why you're meeting a grown man in secret. Tell me what Victor Hernandez has been saying to make you believe that taking money from your own mother is okay. You don't get it. Carlos was pacing now, running his hands through his hair in that nervous gesture I'd loved since he was small. You've been lying to me my whole life. Dad didn't just abandon us. He left money for me, for us, and you've been hiding it. The pain in his voice was like a physical blow. Carlos, sit down. Please. No. Victor showed me the documents. Dad had accounts, investments, money that was supposed to be mine when I turned 17. You've been keeping it from me while we struggle to pay rent, while you work yourself to death, while I watch you count pennies for groceries. What documents? I asked quietly. Carlos grabbed his backpack and pulled out a thick manila envelope, his hand shaking as he scattered papers across our kitchen table. Bank statements, investment summaries, property deeds, all bearing Miguel's name, all completely fabricated. The forgeries were sophisticated enough to fool a desperate teenager who wanted desperately to believe his father had loved him enough to provide for his future. This, Carlos said, stabbing his finger at a fake account statement showing a balance of $180,000. And this, another document claiming Miguel owned property in Arizona. Dad left me enough money for college, enough to help you retire early, enough so we'd never have to worry again. But you, his voice broke completely. You've been hoarding it, letting me watch you struggle, making me feel guilty for wanting things we could actually afford. I pulled out the real documents from Sarah Peterson's office and placed them next to Victor's forgeries. Carlos, these papers aren't real. Your father didn't have secret accounts or hidden property. He died with nothing but debts. You're lying. But his voice lacked conviction now, and I saw doubt creeping into his eyes as he compared the documents. Honey, sit down. Please, let me show you what's real. Carlos slowly righted his chair and sank into it, his defiance crumbling into confusion. I spread out the legitimate trust fund documents, the life insurance paperwork, the official estate settlement from the probate court. Your father did leave you money, I said gently. A life insurance policy for $250,000 that he took out when you were 13. It's been sitting in a trust fund earning interest for 3 years, waiting for your 18th birthday. When you turn 18 in 4 months, you'll have access to approximately $267,000. No lawyers, no fees, no secret meetings required. Carlos stared at the documents, his eyes moving from line to line as the truth slowly penetrated the fog of Victor's manipulation. But Victor said you were hiding money from me. He said Dad told him. Victor is a liar and a con artist. I pulled out my laptop and showed Carlos the research I'd done that afternoon. He's done this before, Carlos. He targets grieving families, usually teenagers who've lost a parent. He creates fake documents, spins stories about hidden inheritances, and tricks his victims into paying him legal fees to access money that either doesn't exist or is already rightfully theirs. I showed him newspaper articles about Victor's previous scams, court records from families he defrauded, a state attorney general's warning about inheritance fraud schemes. Carlos read silently, his face growing paler with each revelation. "He's been grooming you for months," I continued, my voice thick with anger I was trying to control. "Making you believe I was the enemy, that I was keeping secrets from you. He needed you to distrust me so you wouldn't come to me with questions about his stories." "But he knew things about Dad," Carlos whispered. "Personal things. Stories I'd never heard before. He was Miguel's business partner for years. Of course he knows personal stories. That's what makes him so effective. He mixes just enough truth with his lies to make everything seem believable." Carlos was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face as the full scope of his manipulation became clear. "The money I gave him, that was our money. Money you earned working extra shifts, money we needed for groceries and bills. Oh God, Mom, what have I done?" I moved around the table and pulled him into my arms, feeling his tall frame collapse against me like he was 5 years old again. "You were being abused, Carlos. Psychologically manipulated by an expert who knew exactly how to exploit your grief and your love for your father. This isn't your fault." "I stole from you," he sobbed against my shoulder. "I looked you in the eye every morning and pretended everything was normal while I was robbing you at night. What kind of person does that? A scared kid who was being lied to by someone he trusted. A son who wanted so badly to believe his father loved him that he fell for a fantasy that seemed too good to be true." We held each other in our little kitchen while Carlos cried out months of guilt, fear, and confusion. I thought about all the nights I'd lain awake wondering if my son was using drugs or involved with dangerous people, never imagining that the truth was somehow worse, that a predator had wormed his way into Carlos's heart and twisted his love for his father into a weapon against our family. "Tell me everything," I said when his sobs finally subsided. "From the beginning. I need to understand exactly what he did to you so we can figure out how to stop him." Carlos pulled back, wiping his eyes with his sleeve, and began to talk. The story that emerged was even more disturbing than I'd imagined. Victor hadn't just lied about Miguel's finances. He'd systematically rewritten Carlos's understanding of his father's character, our marriage, and the circumstances of our divorce. He said Dad never wanted to leave us, Carlos said, his voice hollow. He said you fought all the time about money, that you were jealous of Dad's success and tried to sabotage his business. He said Dad was planning to file for custody when he died because he was worried about how you were raising me. Each lie was a calculated attack on my character, designed to isolate Carlos from the one person who could protect him from Victor's manipulation. He told me Dad's drinking wasn't that bad, that you exaggerated it to make him look worse in the divorce. He said Dad was getting sober, that he'd stopped drinking months before the accident. The cruelty of rewriting Miguel's addiction as a minor flaw was breathtaking. Carlos had been 8 when his father stumbled drunk into his school play, 13 when Miguel crashed his car into our neighbor's fence, 14 when he missed Carlos's birthday because he was passed out in a bar parking lot. But Victor had convinced my son that these memories were somehow distorted, that I'd poisoned Carlos against his father. He made me feel like I was betraying Dad by believing you, Carlos continued, like I was being disloyal to his memory by accepting that he had problems. He said Dad's biggest regret was that he'd die before he could prove to me what kind of man he really was. And the money? When did he start asking you to pay him? July. He said there were legal complications because of the divorce, that the courts had frozen Dad's assets until they could determine what belonged to him versus what belonged to you. He said he needed money to hire a lawyer who specialized in estate recovery. Carlos had started small, taking $5 or $10 at a time from my purse, telling himself he was investing in his family's future. When Victor claimed the legal fees were higher than expected, Carlos escalated to larger thefts, each one justified by the promise that he'd soon have access to enough money to pay me back with interest. He said, "Once we got Dad's money, I could surprise you with enough to pay off your student loans and maybe even buy a house." He made it sound like I was helping you, like I was being responsible and mature. The psychological manipulation was masterful in its exploitation of Carlos's deepest needs. His desire to be the man of the family, to take care of me the way he felt his father should have, to prove himself worthy of the inheritance he'd been promised. "How much have you given him?" I asked, dreading the answer. "About $800, I think. Maybe more." He kept saying we were almost done, that we just needed a little more to finish the paperwork. $800. Money I'd earned during overtime shifts at the hospital, money we'd needed for Carlos's school supplies and winter clothes, money I'd struggled to save while watching our grocery budget shrink every month. "Mom, I'm so sorry," Carlos said, fresh tears starting. "I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I swear I thought I was helping us. I thought." "You thought you were protecting your family," I said, pulling him close again. "That's what children do when they're being manipulated by predators. They blame themselves for adult crimes." We spent the next hour planning our next steps. I called Sarah Peterson and arranged for her to meet with Carlos the following day, so he could hear directly from Miguel's estate attorney that Victor's claims were fabricated. We discussed filing a police report for fraud and extortion, and I made an appointment for both of us to see a family therapist who specialized in psychological abuse recovery. "What if he tries to contact me before we can get to the police?" Carlos asked. "You're going to block his number and avoid any place he might try to find you. If he shows up at school or here at home, you call me immediately." I handed him my business card with the school's emergency number. "And Carlos, the next time an adult asks you to keep secrets from me, especially secrets involving money or meetings, you come to me first, no matter what they threaten, no matter what they promise." He nodded, looking younger than his 17 years. "I love you, Mom, and I'm going to pay back every penny I took. We'll figure out the money later. Right now, I just want to focus on keeping you safe and making sure Victor Hernandez never hurts another family the way he's hurt ours." As we cleaned up the scattered papers and evidence from our kitchen table, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. My son was still the good, loving boy I'd raised. He'd been victimized by a sophisticated predator, but he wasn't lost to me. The trust between us was damaged, but not destroyed. Tomorrow, we would begin the process of bringing Victor to justice. Tonight, I just wanted to hold my son and let him know that no matter what mistakes he'd made, no matter what lies he'd believed, he would always be safe in his mother's love. Monday morning, Carlos and I sat in Detective Maria Santos's office at the Riverside Police Department, surrounded by evidence folders and legal documents that told the story of Victor's systematic fraud. Detective Santos was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who specialized in financial crimes against minors, and she listened to our story with the grim expression of someone who'd seen this type of predatory behavior before. "Estate fraud targeting grieving families is more common than people realize," she said, reviewing the fake documents Victor had given Carlos. "These forgeries are sophisticated. He's clearly done this before. The good news is that your son's cooperation gives us an excellent chance of building a solid case." Carlos sat rigidly in his chair, still processing the reality that he'd been victimized rather than helped. "What happens now?" he asked. "We need more evidence of the ongoing fraud," Detective Santos explained. "Right now, we have the fake documents and your testimony about the money exchanges, but we need Victor's own words admitting to the scheme. Would you be willing to wear a recording device during your next meeting with him? The thought of Carlos facing Victor again made my stomach clench with anxiety, but I knew it was necessary. Is it safe? I asked. We'll have plainclothes officers positioned throughout the park, and Carlos will have a panic button in case anything goes wrong. Mr. Hernandez has no history of violence. He's a white-collar criminal who relies on manipulation rather than force. Carlos took a shaky breath. I'll do it. I want him to pay for what he did to us. That afternoon, we met with Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, who explained the charges we'd be pursuing: fraud, grand theft, elder abuse of a minor, and criminal exploitation. If convicted on all counts, Mr. Hernandez could face up to 12 years in prison, she said. But I want you to understand that trials can be lengthy and emotionally difficult. Are you prepared for that? Yes, Carlos said without hesitation. I want other kids to know that if this happens to them, there are consequences. The next evening, Carlos wore a nearly invisible recording device provided by the police department. I waited in an unmarked van 2 blocks from Riverside Park, listening through headphones as my son walked into what we hoped would be Victor's final manipulation. Uncle Victor! Carlos's voice came through clearly as he approached the picnic tables. Carlos, there you are, kid. You look stressed. Everything okay at home? Even through the recording equipment, I could hear the false warmth in Victor's voice, the practiced concern that had fooled my son for months. It made my skin crawl to realize how expertly this man manipulated emotions. I'm worried about my mom, Carlos said, following the script we'd rehearsed with Detective Santos. She's been asking questions about my finances, wondering where some of her money went. I think she might be getting suspicious. That's exactly what I was afraid of, Victor replied. Your mother has always been controlling about money, Carlos. She doesn't want you to have access to your father's inheritance because it threatens her power over you. But what if she finds out about the payments I've been making to you? What if she calls the police? She won't call the police, Victor said confidently, because then she'd have to admit that she's been hiding your father's money from you all these years. She's more guilty than anyone in this situation. The recording captured 23 minutes of Victor reinforcing his lies, demanding another $300 for final legal fees, and threatening to abandon the inheritance recovery if Carlos didn't find a way to keep me from asking questions. Most damning of all, he explicitly admitted that he'd been coaching Carlos to steal from me. I know it's hard taking money from your mom's purse, Victor said, but think of it as borrowing against your inheritance. Once we get access to your dad's accounts, you'll be able to pay her back 10 times over. When Carlos asked direct questions about the timeline for accessing the supposed inheritance, Victor's answers became vague and contradictory. He claimed the money was tied up in international banking complications and probate court delays, clearly stalling tactics designed to keep the con going as long as possible. Police arrested Victor as he left the park, finding the $300 Carlos had given him still in his jacket pocket, along with a notebook containing detailed information about our family's finances and Carlos's emotional vulnerabilities. During the search of Victor's apartment, investigators discovered evidence of at least 6 other families he'd targeted with similar schemes over the past 5 years. The trial took place 8 months later. Carlos testified with remarkable courage and clarity, describing how Victor had exploited his grief and his desire to connect with his father's memory. I watched from the gallery as my son, now 18 and with full access to his legitimate trust fund, calmly explained to the jury how he'd been systematically manipulated into stealing from his own mother. I wanted so badly to believe that my dad had provided for us, Carlos said during his testimony. Mr. Hernandez knew exactly what I needed to hear, and he used my love for my father against me. Victor was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The judge specifically noted the calculating cruelty of targeting grieving children and the systematic destruction of family trust that characterized Victor's crimes. But the legal victory was only part of our healing process. Carlos and I spent nearly a year in family therapy, working with Dr. Rebecca Chen to rebuild the trust that Victor's manipulation had damaged. The sessions were sometimes painful. Carlos had to confront the reality that his idealized memories of Miguel were partly fantasy, while I had to accept that I'd failed to protect my son from a predator who'd exploited his vulnerabilities. Healing from psychological manipulation takes time, Dr. Chin explained during one of our early sessions. Carlos was essentially brainwashed by someone who understood exactly how to exploit his emotional needs. Recovery isn't just about forgiving. It's about learning to trust your own perceptions again. Carlos struggled with guilt and self-doubt for months. "How could I have been so stupid?" he'd ask during particularly difficult sessions. The signs were all there. Why didn't I see through his lies? "Because you were a grieving child being manipulated by an expert," Dr. Chin replied. Adults who prey on minors are skilled at exploiting exactly the vulnerabilities that Victor targeted in you. Your desire to connect with your father's memory, your worry about your family's finances, your natural trust in adults who claim to care about you. These aren't character flaws. They're normal human emotions that he weaponized against you. Gradually, we rebuilt our relationship stronger than before. Carlos used a portion of his trust fund to pay back every penny he'd taken from me, despite my protests that it wasn't necessary. "I need to do this, Mom," he said. "Not because you're demanding it, but because it helps me feel like I'm making things right." He also established a scholarship fund at his high school for students who'd lost a parent, and he began volunteering with a nonprofit that helps teenagers recognize and report financial fraud. "If my story can prevent even one kid from going through what I went through," he told me, "then maybe something good came out of this nightmare." Now, 2 years later, Carlos is thriving in his computer science program at UC Berkeley, funded by the trust fund his father actually did leave him. He's dating a wonderful girl named Amy, who knows our whole story and admires Carlos's courage in speaking out about manipulation and fraud. Most importantly, our relationship is built on complete honesty and open communication. I still work as a school counselor, but now I also speak at workshops about financial fraud targeting families in crisis. I've learned to recognize the signs of predatory behavior that I missed when Victor was grooming Carlos, and I've helped several families identify and report similar schemes. The hardest part about this type of abuse, I tell audiences, is that it targets our deepest emotions, our love for family, our desire to protect our children, our grief over loss. Predators like Victor Hernandez are experts at identifying vulnerable families and exploiting exactly the emotions that make us human. If you're watching this video and any part of our story sounds familiar, if someone is promising you access to hidden money, asking you to keep financial secrets from family members, or encouraging you to distrust the people who love you most, please reach out for help. Contact local police, speak with a trusted adult, or call the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's fraud hotline. Remember that legitimate inheritance claims don't require secrecy, upfront payments, or family deception. If someone is asking you to pay money to access money that's supposedly yours, you're being scammed. Carlos and I learned that the truth, no matter how painful, is always stronger than the most beautiful lie. Our family survived Victor's manipulation because we chose honesty over fantasy, reality over false hope. Thank you for watching Voices of Rosa. Please like and subscribe if this story helped you, and share it with anyone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one, and your support means everything to our family. Most importantly, remember that if you're being manipulated or abused, it's not your fault. There are people who want to help you, and there is always hope for healing and justice. Stay strong and never stop fighting for the truth.